A man stands at the edge of the Black Sea and looks out at the water. He has survived the bombs. He has survived the sinking. And what he sees, he will never be able to unsee. For 100 meters from the shore, he cannot find the surface of the sea, because the sea is covered in the dead. This is Cape Chersonese on the tip of Crimea, May the 10th, 1944. 2 years earlier, on this exact spit of land, it was Soviet soldiers who stood trapped here, waiting for a fleet that never came. Now the uniforms have changed. The trap has not. This time, the ships did come. And that is what makes this the worst story. To understand how thousands of men ended up floating in that sea, you have to go back to a decision made far away by a man who would never see the water. By the spring of 1944, the tide of the war in the East had turned hard against Germany. But one army was still clinging to the Crimean Peninsula, the German 17th Army, and tens of thousands of Romanian allies fighting alongside it. Crimea was surrounded, cut off by land. It could be supplied only by sea and by air. And still, the order from headquarters was the same: hold. Hitler called Crimea his unsinkable aircraft carrier. Lose it, he believed, and Soviet bombers could reach the Romanian oil fields at Ploiesti, the fuel his armies ran on. Lose it, and neutral Turkey might be tempted into the war against him. So when the 17th Army's commander, General Erwin Janica, asked again and again for permission to evacuate his men by sea, the answer, for months, was no. 220,000 men were ordered to stand on an island they could not hold. There was a terrible irony in all of this, though no one in that headquarters seems to have felt it. 2 years before, the Germans had stood where the Soviets now stood. In July of 1942, when Sevastopol finally fell to the German assault, the surviving Soviet defenders had fled to the very tip of the peninsula, to Cape Chersonese, beside the great armored coastal battery there. They built a perimeter. They waited for their navy to take them off. Their navy did not come. Tens of thousands were left on the rocks to be killed or captured. Now the wheel was turning, and the men about to be trapped on that same cape were the victors of 1942. On the 8th of April, 1944, the Red Army attacked. The Soviet 4th Ukrainian Front smashed through the defenses at the Perekop Isthmus and across the salt marshes of the Sivash. Within days, the German and Romanian front in Crimea simply came apart. Only on the 12th of April did Hitler relent, and even then, only halfway. Pull back to Sevastopol, he allowed. Ship out the wounded, the clerks, the non-essential. But the fighting men were to stay and hold the city for the time being. Those 4 words cost thousands of lives. The job of getting that army off the peninsula fell, more than to anyone, to the Romanian Royal Navy. They gave the evacuation a code name, Operation 60,000, for the roughly 65,000 Romanian troops still on the peninsula. It would become the largest, most desperate naval operation in Romania's history. The route ran from the port of Constanta to Sevastopol and back, 220 nautical miles of open water, a full day's crossing, beneath a sky that no longer belonged to them. At first, it worked. Through the second half of April, convoy after convoy ran the gauntlet. More than 70,000 men were carried to safety in the first 2 weeks, at a cost of barely 1 in 100. But the men aboard those ships knew their luck was a borrowed thing. The Soviet Air Force was growing bolder. Submarines stalked the convoys, and the German fighter cover was thinning by the day. Every crossing was a wager, and the odds were getting worse. In the first week of May, the last walls came down. The Soviets stormed the Sapun Heights, the high ground that shielded Sevastopol. With those gone, the city was finished. On the night of the 7th of May, the 17th Army gave up Sevastopol itself and fell back, to the only ground left, to Cape Chersonese, the fingertip of land, the same cape where the Soviets had been abandoned 2 years before. Now there was nowhere left to retreat. There was only the sea. On the 9th of May, the situation became hopeless. Soviet artillery could now reach the last airfield at Chersonese and the harbor of Sevastopol. The final transport planes of wounded clawed into the air and were gone. And with the airfield under fire, The German fighters could no longer operate from Crimea at all. The sky above the Cape was handed completely to the enemy. Into that sky the next morning sailed 2 ships full of men. If you made it this far, you're one of us. Tap the like button and subscribe. We unbury history every week. Now, back to our story. Their names were Teja and Totila. Neither was a warship. Totila had been a Hungarian cargo vessel barely 2 years old, taken into German service only weeks before. 3,600 tons, a handful of light anti-aircraft guns, built to carry freight, now ordered to carry desperate men out of an inferno. Together they were the Patria convoy, escorted across by the Romanian destroyers Maricesti and Regina Maria. They were the first ships to reach Cape Chersonese on the morning of the 10th of May. At 5:20 in the morning, the first wave came. 20 Soviet aircraft. Somehow, the ships survived it untouched. For the next 3 hours, small assault boats shuttled men out from the beaches and packed them aboard. Thousands of them. Soldiers who had fought their way across a peninsula and now climbed, dripping up the sides of 2 overloaded freighters, certain that the worst was behind them. By 8:30, the ships were full far beyond any safe number. They turned for home, for Constanta, guarded now by just 3 small escort boats. They never had a chance. At 9:30, 21 Soviet ground attack planes found the convoy. 3 bombs struck the Totila. She had no armor, no watertight discipline of a warship, and far too many men aboard. She went down fast. 5,000 men were on her. Around 3,000 Germans. Around 2,000 Romanians. The escort could not stop. To stop in those waters, under those planes, was to join her on the bottom. Teja steamed on, leaving the men of the Totila in the water behind her. And the day was only half over. For 5 hours, the Teja ran for Romania, crammed with survivors and her own thousands. At 2:45 in the afternoon, 11 more Soviet bombers caught her. The Teja sank with some 4,000 to 5,000 men aboard, among them 2,000 Romanians of a detachment commanded by a lieutenant colonel named Ardeleanu. The 3 small escort boats turned back into the wreckage and saved what they could. Between 2 sunken ships and many thousands of men, they pulled roughly 400 from the sea. Then they, too, had to run. In a single day, on a single stretch of water, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 men were lost. 2 ships. 1 morning, 1 afternoon. These 2 sinkings alone accounted for more than 9 in every 10 deaths of the entire May evacuation. It stands among the deadliest maritime disasters in all of human history, deadlier than the Lusitania, deadlier than the Titanic many times over. And almost no one outside these 2 countries has ever heard of it. Lieutenant Colonel Ardeleanu had survived all of it. He had held a line against a Soviet offensive south of the Sivash. He had fought his way back to Sevastopol with the remnants of his regiment. He had been chosen to command the rear guard, the men left behind to cover the others' escape. He survived the land, and then he drowned in the middle of the Black Sea, on a ship that should have been his salvation. That was the particular cruelty of Operation 60,000. The ship was not rescue. The ship was the most dangerous place a man could be. The rescue did not entirely end that day. The next morning, the Romanian destroyer, Regele Ferdinand, herself attacked 33 times in a single morning, hit by a bomb that by sheer luck did not explode, found 8 men clinging to a raft in open water, 6 Germans, 2 Romanians, survivors of the Teja, still alive a day later. Days afterward, motorboats were still pulling handfuls of men off rafts drifting near the coast, 57 Germans, in one of the last acts of the whole operation. For every one of those, there were 100 the sea had already taken. The Romanian Navy was honored for what it did. Their commander, Rear Admiral Horia Masalariu, received the German Knight's Cross, the only Romanian naval officer ever to be given one. Even the Germans were astonished that the Romanians had risked their precious destroyers right up against that burning shore. But honor is a thin thing against arithmetic. Hitler's months of delay had left tens of thousands of men on that peninsula, until the very moment the sky was lost. An evacuation begun a few weeks earlier would have saved most of them. And the cruelest twist of all, just 3 months after these men drowned for the Alliance, Romania changed sides and joined the Allies. They had died for a partnership that was already ending. The Totila is still there. In May of 2003, divers found her wreck on the floor of the Black Sea, off Sevastopol, close to the Cape where she had loaded her last passengers. She lies in the dark with most of her dead, where the bombs put her, almost 60 years before anyone came looking. The sea has kept its secret well. There is no great memorial on the surface, only the water, and the names that were never fully counted. Stand on Cape Chersonese and you are standing on one of the cruelest pieces of ground in the history of this war. In 1942, the trapped men here were Soviet, and the ships never came. In 1944, the trapped men were German and Romanian, and the ships came, and were turned into tombs before they reached open sea. The uniforms changed. The flags changed. The Cape did not. The same wind, the same rocks, the same gray water that swallowed a Dunkirk that never happened, and then swallowed thousands more 2 years later. That is the lesson the Cape teaches, if anyone will stand there long enough to learn it. War does not remember which side you were on. It only remembers the ground, and the ground takes everyone. Teja and Totila, the 10th of May, 1944, somewhere between 8 and 10,000 men, German, Romanian, and the forgotten in between, who went into the water off Cape Chersonese and did not come out. This was not a glory, it was a tragedy, and it deserves, at the very least, to be remembered.